a left right out. Today is, what is it anyway? July 14th. So we'll start off with a little rundown of what's going on in the markets. I like to get straight to it, make sure that's going. Yeah. All right. So today was, I always say it's an interesting, but it was really interesting day because in the morning the futures were down solid 600 points. Opened. I mean, I think the Dow was down 6 something. The S&P was down 60 something points, and then it kind of rallied back in the midday, a little bit sell-off, and then it rocketed upward to end at only less than, the Dow less than 150 points, less than, I think it's 142, and then and the S&P was only off 11. So when you got this, if you didn't know, which I didn't do anything on because there was some on the CPI data front, it came in at 9.1, and then if you look at the projections, I mean, that just blew them away. I think they were looking for 8.8 or something like that. And then there was a false number that was given the day before, which turns out, and I think they had it at 8.9, which is the fictitious report, I believe. Regardless, it doesn't matter, 9.1. And if you actually apples to apples, like I've said before, these numbers there's a lot of hedonic adjustments. There's a lot of different weightings on some of these numbers, which now you're seeing that, even the rentals equivalent number, sorry, I got allergies, man. That rentals equivalent number is still is actually starting to hurt now because it's starting to reflect a little bit more of what reality is in the world, which it hasn't in the past. There's been this like disconnect there. So you've had costs really rising, and it hasn't been reflected. But anyway, if you actually took this number and calculated it like you did in the 80s, 90s, whatever, you're probably looking at close to 18 something percent, probably the largest price increase overall in American history, probably since the Continental. But once again, I got to remind you, this is an inflation number. This is a symptom of inflation. This is like the what is your fever of the flu, because inflation would be the flu, and the symptoms of the flu are fever and whatever, sweat, all these other things, and those are caused by the flu. But you can get these things through other mechanisms. We're talking about this oversupply of dollars that's been pushed out there. But here we go. So like I said, when I was saying the last time, I was like, well, we got to see what consumer credit, if it outstrips the QT that's being that's happening through the Fed. And I mean, I haven't really looked at it too much because I'm looking at because usually monetary policy, it takes a couple quarters, 1 to 2 quarters for it to really take effect. So what happened earlier this year is what's actually affecting us now. But the consumer credit numbers still don't look that great. The mortgage market doesn't look that great. And what I mean by the consumer credit numbers, I mean, they're still expanding. It's not good. But the QT is happening from what I can tell. So quantitative tightening, if you look at the Fed balance sheet. And now this CPI number is going to give them justification to do the 3/4 point or 75 bips rate hike, if not 100. I mean, they're talking about 100, but I think you're just going to get a solid 75 because these guys, we look at this number and we've been saying this for a while now. This is flashing red. This is an emergency crisis situation. People are hurting. People are being kicked out of their homes. They can't afford it. People can't eat. There's a lot of it. I mean, a lot of this. Maybe you're not one of them, but you need to look around and get outside your bubble because this stuff is happening. You look at shortages. That's also due to not just Ukraine or Russia. That's due to monetary policy as well. A lot of these shortages are. So you look at all this stuff. There's an emergency. So why hasn't the Fed done anything? So to me, like when this stuff and these numbers fresh off the press, hey, we haven't really hit anything. We did a hike in whatever earlier this year, a couple hikes. Nothing's happening. We need to not wait till the meeting at the end of the month. We need to do something like today, right? Let's shoot it up, and I'll be conservative here, and let's shoot it up a couple 100 basis points just to get frisky here. But to me, if you're at 9.1, use their numbers. We won't even use the 18 or whatever. If you take like shadow stats numbers, or you take how you calculated before, you should be at 10. You should be at 10 or 9.5. I'll go 9.5, and you'll have. I mean, yeah, we're going to go into a recession. We're in a recession technically already. So you need to knock these prices down. We need to, help the little guy out a little bit because we're going through the recession. Either we're going to clean out some of this stuff, if and that's a weird. Anyway, I don't want to talk too much about this right now, but it's an interesting conundrum when you look at. It seems like nothing really makes sense at the moment because I look at the market rallying on this. I'm like, well, hey, this is giving the Fed the green light to raise interest rates. Well, what does that do? We're going to, not only are you going to raise interest rates on, like, since it's a socialistic system right there, it's a weight that's holding this balloon of debt, the debt market in a certain area. You're going to increase the cost of borrowing for a lot of these companies. And like I said, there's a lot of companies that shouldn't be in existence. And you're seeing in the crypto market, I think they got the third major lender or crypto company bankruptcy. You also have other companies that Revlon. There's a bunch of other companies too. You track it. They're on the verge of bankruptcy, and they will be when they have to, because they have to access the debt market. Now let's look at the federal government. Well, most of their debts within, they're mainly whatever short-term their treasuries or whatnot. You're talking about the 5 years and closer, I believe. Last time I looked, it was something like that, where we have to roll debt over fairly significantly in a short period of time. And you're talking about having to do that with interest rates 3 times the amount of whatever that we were getting a few years ago. That's a significant amount of increase in the budget, or it's going to take up that much more. So either taxes are going to go up, or spending is going to go up. So you have inflationary pressures upward. And then, so either way, you're going to get taxed. Let's just put it that way. Oil market's the only thing I could see that's sold off a little bit. And I'm going straight to that because we're going to roll off of this economic stuff because it is so convoluted right now. Like I said, I've been shorting a lot of things and I've made a little bit of cash, thankfully, because that's what I've kind of been living off of. But I'm looking for another way to get in short before all this stuff. So hopefully we do have that rally like I was talking about, and then we get short. But anyway, okay, the oil market sold off, which is be good. Hopefully get a little relief at the pump, which where I'm at, the diesel prices have dropped, and I've never been so happy to have $5.19 diesel. I never thought I'm like, oh man, it's dropping. And then I got to, remember that it's $5.19. I'm still not getting crap for what I'm paying. I can almost get 2 gallons for $10. I remember just go, I'll throw $10 in. And you get 4 or 5 gallons. I was like, I can run around town if I just had to stay in town for a week. But don't even get me started on that. But anyway, one of the things that's going on in the oil markets, and that's why we're gonna break off from that a little bit into Saudi Arabia and the Middle East, where Joe Biden's been hobnobbing. He's supposed to be hobnobbing over there with MBS, which is an interesting character because the dynamics between Biden and MBS. I know that Biden was critical, rightfully so. I'll give Biden over I think Khashoggi, the one journalist that he went into a hotel room with all these Saudis and came out in a body bag and parts. All right, so they obviously killed him. It can't, there's enough evidence to say that MBS was orchestrated that killing, and Biden's being pretty critical of him. He's been willing to deal with the Iranians in one hand, which Saudi Arabia and Iran are not the greatest of friends. Let's just put it that way. And now he's over there begging. Well, here's the thing about that when we talk about the oil. What's one of the things that holds the dollar up? Well, oil does, because it's you can take a dollar and it's backed by oil essentially. You can go there. That's what the market's based out of. That's what you're denominating oil out of. So essentially, the dollar is essentially backed by oil in a very loose sense. I mean, that's what they call the Petro dollar. And it's so significant, it allows us to be able to export these dollars for these cheap goods because these countries know that they can use these dollars. They're fluid. I mean, they're liquid. You can always get something with them. You always get a useful resource, which is oil, with these dollars. Now, Biden's going over there, and there's been some controversy about handshakes and stuff, which, that doesn't look that great because then he's over there kissing dudes' heads in Israel and all kinds of stuff. But the thing with MBS now, there's been rumblings, and this is where it's really significant. So if you're with me after 9 minutes, and you're going to get this little chunk of information, which is pretty interesting. So MBS has actually been contemplating, and he's been real chummy with old Putin now, contemplating essentially getting off the petrodollar in aligning his reserves in his country with more of the BRIC nations. And if you haven't followed this over the last few years, the BRIC nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, have been developing a plan to have a different reserve currency or a basket of currencies that they can utilize for international trade. And if Saudi Arabia were to denominate its oil reserves and potentially OPEC's, you'd have a significant lack of demand for dollars, and you'd have the dollar essentially not the reserve currency anymore, in my opinion, because we've already moved off a significant amount. There's a lot of cracks in that dam, and if this happens, then that's pretty much the breaching of the dam, and you'll see the dollar just kind of meld in, or you'll have a bifurcation or a bipolar world of currencies. But more than likely, even then, you'll have like Europe and a few of these other countries, and maybe even ourselves, if we're not willing to utilize natural resources, having to go out into the market and get whatever various currencies in order to even trade in oil or even other natural resources we might be needing from these various countries. So that's putting a tremendous amount of currency pressure or pressure on our own currency, and it's backing as a reserve status. So that's like, there's a lot of huge implications there, and we don't even really have a whole lot of time because I like to keep these kind of short to go into that. But I'm talking about not only standard of living here, which we're in this weird cycle continually. At least the Fed, at least since 2008, we've just this ever present bubble burst or booms and bust cycles. It's been before that, but once we lose the reserve currency, we're going to see a huge flushing of our overall standard of living. And I'm not saying that it's going to be initially a super bad thing, and then hopefully we can rebuild. We have the capacity, the manufacturing capacity still. The economy is very resilient. I mean, we have a very broad, dynamic economy in America. It's not just consumer. Even though that's taken main stage, and they say whatever 70% doesn't even make sense to me. How does 70% of your economy consumption? It's like you should have some kind of balance somewhere. But anyway, so those pressures are occurring on the international stage. There are some other things we need to go over real quick before we end this. I had that going here. Where was it? There was something about China doing a debt jubilee. That's the other thing I kind of wanted to touch on. It is kind of interesting because they're having some cracks in their economy. They always have, but they are able to now that they have an actual manufacturing base that's vastly superior to ours. In fact, that's where we're sending a lot of our reserves to. We're sending them useless paper and getting goods, but they are shuffling chairs on a Titanic over there as well. So, I mean, they're having a potential mortgage crisis coming down the docket. We've talked about this with some of their other institutional banks that were having issues earlier. I think it was late last year or early this year. And now we're kind of starting to see the other leg fall on that. Now, I don't even talk about Japan, but it's interesting to see that. You got China showing some alarms. You got Sri Lanka in upheaval. You've got a number of countries that are in absolute turmoil. You have the Dutch, that's an interesting thing. So at the same time when you have economic turmoil, some of the Western countries, us included, are proposing some just insanity or conducting insane policies that are restricting supply in vital goods, such as, we're looking at the farming industry in the Dutch. And we'll see what happens over there. There's a lot of turmoil. Now, it's funny, we talk about all this and we're not even talking about the Ukraine-Russia thing anymore. Like I said, it's kind of over. At the same time, maybe I was off a little bit, but to me it was over once they got that land bridge to, my brain's shot. But when they were able to, what's that? The little island there where they have, what I'm talking about. It starts with an O. I don't know. I've been there and I can't even remember right now. It's late. But anyway, they once they got that connected to mainland Russia and Donetsk and Luhansk, it was essentially over to me. And there's always going to be skirmishes now. And one of the reasons there's not going to be like a peace treaty is because Zelensky is using this as a funding mechanism now from the West, and we're pumping in weapons, money. Essentially, it is an industry for him at this moment, and also a seat of power. If you've paid attention, you realize the Ukrainian government's actually been dissolving opposition parties. I think they've done 2 major parties already, consolidating, and also proposing pretty draconian laws. So in the end, I don't know if this guy doesn't just become a pseudo dictator, and we have pretty much bought him, and almost like a little, I don't know, just a little dictator over there of sorts, or kind of like a authoritarian that, like we like to place people in power. So it wouldn't surprise me if that's just what this ends up being in another laundering, in continuous money laundering scams over there, or use it as a money laundering mechanism for our elites in the West. And potential counter to Russia, that's what they might think as well. But there's just going to be skirmishes over there. I don't think Russia's really intent on taking a huge, vast parts of Ukraine anymore. I think they got what they want, and maybe you can inch up here and there if Ukraine presents that opportunity. If they keep not wanting to go on to the peace talks, or if they don't want peace, which doesn't really necessarily seem to pay very well. Anyway, I guess I'll end that there. It's kind of late when I'm doing this, so my brain's not quite firing. I was going to see if there's, in case there was anything else on here. Oh, there's some more stuff on China. Here we go. Chinese GDP growth plunges in Q2. So these things are all happening. So here's the funny things. Last thing. So we're in a recession, in my opinion. We're getting really horrible numbers, and we're in the loosest monetary policy we've had in a number of years. We've got a Fed balance sheet that's close to $9 trillion still. We've got consumer credit going out the yin yang. You got still, if you take about it, you're at negative rates in reality, negative real rates. Still, even if you use a CPI number, negative real rates by almost 7%. It's crazy. And these people who say shallow, I don't know what they're talking about, man. I really don't. Yeah, by any metric, the way this boom has proceeded or has gone down, you would suspect a corresponding bust. Anyway, a lot of things going on. I try to get it all. I'll just pick a subject and just do 20 minutes on that instead of trying to go over everything. And we might start doing that instead of doing this. But there's just so much. There's so much. I only scratched the surface on this, and it's like we're not even talking about what's going on in the Mexican border. Some of the cartel stuff. Apparently, some of the news that came out of there, which I'm going to do a little bit on that. We might go on that whole show, because there's some interesting things about what the government was doing to colluding with Mexican government and other cartels with cartel members, torture and all kinds of stuff. Anyway, leave it there. Talk to you later.